discussing how contractors can finish strong and finish well when they decide to exit their business. This is the Contractor Succession Podcast.
Welcome to the Contractor Succession Podcast. My name is Marty Wolf, and with me today is my partner and my co-host of the Contractor Succession Podcast, Mr. Scott Good. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Marty. Happy Valentine's Day for those that will be listening to this a week or so later.
Yeah. Well, I have some jokes to follow up on that, but I'm going to not go down that road, on this podcast and video we have, because we don't want to embarrass ourselves in front of our guest, who is Mr. Dave Bookbinder, our good friend. Hi, Dave.
Hey, fellas. Thanks for having me on. And honestly, there's nothing you guys couldn't do or could do that would embarrass me. So, or embarrass yourselves, honestly. I mean, I've known you guys long enough, so I say go for it.
Yeah, well, Lord knows what we're going to say or do, but we try to be informational. Again, this is the Contractor Succession Podcast, and as I already mentioned, Dave Bookbinder is our guest, and he is a managing director at a company called B. Riley Financial. Dave is also the host of a great podcast called Behind the Numbers, and Dave also wrote a great book called The New ROI, or ROI stands for Return on Individuals, a little turn there in terms of a different way of looking at things. Dave, we're going to talk about your book. We're going to talk about your podcast in a few minutes. So, guys, we talked about doing something, approaching our interview, this discussion, a little differently. So we're going to throw out I guess we're going to call it a case study. So, hey, it's good enough for the Harvard Business Review, guys. It's okay with us, right, Dave Bookbinder? Good approach.
So you're going to make stuff up here, and we're going to kick it around.
That's exactly right. So again, that's the start of our disclaimer. Anything that we say here is a disclaimer. The disclaimer is that we're not offering any financial advice. We're not talking about any specific company, and we need to put that disclaimer in there. So, Dave, I mentioned that you're with a company called B. Riley Financial. Why don't you tell us about that organization and tell us about your role in that organization?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Marty. And again, thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure to be on your program and kicking things around with you both. So B. Riley Financial is a publicly traded financial services consulting firm. So we basically offer services for the CFO, ranging from what I would call cradle to grave. So think venture capital funding, investment banking with mergers and acquisitions, buy side, sell side, capital raise. You mentioned I'm the managing director here at the firm. I am in the advisory practice where I lead the valuation group for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. So it's a full service valuation practice, which means we do machinery and equipment appraisal, real estate appraisal, and we also value businesses and intellectual property assets. The firm does a whole host of other things. I would say go check it out, brileyfin.com for the rest of the story.
Yeah, brileyfin.com, B. Riley, R-I-L-E-Y, Fin, F-I-N.com. So check them out for the rest of the story. Again, I mentioned that we're going to do a case study approach here. So here are the bullet points, guys. You got your pens ready? Are you ready to write down the notes here so we can address these points? So here's the company, a fictitious company that we're going to talk about, and we're going to look to Dave to give us some feedback. So here we have an HVAC business. They've been in business about 40 years. They're doing about $15 million in revenue, and the company is profitable. There's a nice mix of commercial and residential customers. Son does work in the business, but is not interested in buying or taking over the business. The business is located in a growing market. I've been hearing a lot about the growing markets in Texas and in Florida. So, Dave, when you're thinking about giving us some answers, this is in a growing market like Florida or Texas. There is one single owner. There's no partners. And this owner that I've been referring to is in his mid-60s. And although he is in good health, recently had a little health scare, and he decided he needed to start looking at exiting or selling the business. So we got all that down. Scott, good. You got all that down. We kind of heard some stories like this, right?
Occasionally we pick up actually some very close to this.
Yeah. So again, we're not talking about anything specific, and we are not offering any advice. So with that being the case study, Dave, I guess the obvious question is, what should this owner do first? Let's start there.
Okay, so I scribbled as fast as I could, and I can't read my own handwriting, which has always been a problem for me. So bear with me here. But I think you mentioned that the owner was in ill health or had a health issue.
He's in his 60s, and although in good health, he had a little bit of a health scare.
Okay.
So that kind of got him thinking about, well, maybe I should think about selling or transitioning out of the business.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the first thing, of course, is to sit down with the family. You mentioned the son's not interested in taking over the business, but first things first, let's sit down with the family and talk about where we are and what we really want to do, and understand if this really is, I'll call it the uh-oh moment, where now the business owner has decided it is in fact time to sell, or if it's a triggering event where the business owner is thinking, maybe it's time for me to start thinking about putting a plan in place to sell. Because there are two different paths that you could travel down as to whether or not, I'll use the analogy of a house sale, right? We have to put a for sale sign on the front lawn right now. Well, I'm going to need carpeting and paint and a few other touch-up things I didn't have a chance to do now because I have to put the for sale sign up. If I have some runway and I can plan a little bit, I can get that paint work done, I can get the carpeting in place. So when I put the for sale sign in the front lawn, I'm presenting the house in its best way. So same thing with the business. So I think we need to understand where we really are in that moment.
So, Scott, we hear things like this. What do we often hear from owners? Are they thinking short-term, long-term, whatever health they're in? What are they normally saying to us at Contractor Succession?
Well, David mentioned trigger events. And, oftentimes people put this off and we'll hear 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years, not thinking that something could occur, this trigger event, that could make it happen a whole lot sooner. And so when people put that 5-year, timeline out there, they think they've got forever to get this stuff, organized. Not even thinking about the trigger event, the beer truck hitting you as you're walking across College Avenue in my town, State College, Pennsylvania. So, the trigger event thing is the one that we hear or that we talk about a lot because most business owners don't think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, they when you get into your 60s, you would think that most of them do, and some of them do. But we often refer to a phrase called built to sell, and the idea that you should be running your business because you are going to exit your business one point or another. You're going out with your boots on, or you're going out, you're deciding to do it in a healthy and a financially rewarding way. So, Dave, another thing that often gets discussed or is confused, we're going to assume for a minute that this owner, this little health scare kind of was a trigger event. And we often hear, well, what should I do? Should I take this to a business broker? Do I need an investment banker? And maybe that has something to do with the size of the business. So maybe you can help us with that. We're saying this business is a $15 million a year business and it's profitable. So there's some options we often hear.
Yeah, let me get to that in 1 second, but I just want to expound upon something that you had said, Marty, in response to Scott's comments about being built to sell. Whenever I'm talking to business owners, yes, an ideal situation is to start having a 3 to 5 year plan, but it doesn't mean you wait 3 or 5 years to now say, okay, let's get ready. Like you said, be built to sell because anything can happen at any point in time. So I always tell folks the point of emphasis here is the exit is, yes, in fact, an event, but you have to think about it as a process and you need to have the time to start getting yourself ready for that. So that said, you can never do enough planning. So when I think about a $15 million company, you were spot on, Marty. So where you go, who's going to be your intermediary is really a function of the size and the profitability. So my instinct is that this is something that probably fits into the wheelhouse of more of an investment banking firm than a business broker.
Okay. Why?
Well, just because, again, the size. You mentioned it's profitable. We didn't talk about how much the profitability is, but 15 million is generally a large enough entity that you're going to get the interest of an investment bank as opposed to a business broker. And I think of business brokers, I'm thinking smaller businesses, maybe up to a million, maybe two in sales, something like that. But generally the much smaller ones, the mom and pop shops, a dry cleaner, um, it could be a small contracting company, exterminator business or something like that, where the business broker is going to be able to add value. But when you're talking about a $15 million company, my spider sense is that you'll find an investment bank that can really run a good strategic auction process for you and maximize your valuation.
So let's go deeper on that. Explain what an investment banker would do with you and for you. What role would they play?
Yeah, so I'm a former investment banker myself, so I've seen the process, and I've seen the horror stories where companies decided that they didn't want to pay a fee. The analogy, again, to use for a house sale. So I thought I was a smart enough guy and I could sell my own house in a former life way back. And I tried to do a for sale by owner thing and realized, what, there's a reason why people specialize in this. The same way when I was doing investment banking, we were hired to do the sell side. So what the investment bank does for you is they create tension in the marketplace, competitive tension, so that when a potential buyer receives an offering document, which is a whole story of the company that's being offered for sale, it's an in-depth discussion of the industry, the opportunity, management, financial performance, etc. When that potential buyer gets that book and it's got number 18 on it, for example, it says to them that we need to be serious and thoughtful in how we respond to this. There's a process that's being run here. My competitors are going to be looking at this business. And if I really want to do this, I got to put my best foot forward, have my pencil sharp to get in the game. So the investment banker not only creates that competitive tension around valuation, but they'll also navigate the entire, we'll call it the administrative piece in terms of reaching out to potential buyers, identifying them, qualifying them, scheduling and facilitating the management meetings. My colleagues here at B. Riley do that all day long for our clients and helping them to run a really tight process so that management can do what they do best, run their business, and let the intermediary handle what they do best in terms of getting you the sale that you're looking for.
Scott, anything to add to that or thoughts, questions?
No, actually, the term competitive tension, I like that because that really is setting things up to allow you to go out and do some good shopping and let people know that you're serious about being out on the market.
I've heard the phrase building the right team, Dave. How important is that? I mean, we've talked about it. We jumped right to an investment banker, but there are other people, especially if this sounds about the right size that, well, anytime you do a transaction, you should have a team around you. What would that team look like, Dave?
So I assume you're talking about the team that the business owner would want to have surrounding them. Yeah. So, this is something that I talk about and I've written about. Funny. I wrote an article a while back called Thinking of Selling Your Business. Here's 5 things you need and 1 you don't. And in that article, I outline what a business owner should be thinking about in terms of how to compile a team. So what you need to do is, I think, an accountant. A lot of business owners have an accountant, right? But maybe that accountant is a little, I'll say, less sophisticated. Maybe it's somebody that's really more of a bookkeeper rather than an accountant. This may be an opportunity for them to start thinking strategically about an accounting upgrade. A lawyer. And as I joke in the article, not your brother-in-law, the personal injury attorney, right?
Yeah.
You want somebody who's skilled in documenting a transaction, who's been through the ropes before and knows how to represent and paper this transaction for you. Also think it's a good idea to have your wealth manager involved. And if you don't have one, good idea to get one because it isn't always just about getting the most in terms of the value on the sale. Of course, everybody wants that. But when you start to think big picture holistically, if you got a little less in valuation for whatever reason, and your wealth manager manages those proceeds appropriately, you may be just fine or better. So, but you want them thinking about it so they can help you in managing any tax implications and also diversification issues.
There's a lot of horror stories out there of people not understanding that and getting a chunk of dough, and all of a sudden, here they got a chunk of dough, and they didn't plan for any of that. The wealth manager, or no, they don't have a solid estate plan or anything like that.
So we assume the investment banker is already at the table.
Yeah.
So now that you've got those components, you've got to designate somebody to play quarterback for you, because it's imperative that everybody's talking to each other.
So in that article you wrote, one of them you say is you don't always need a valuation. I thought you always needed a valuation of your company. When
Well,
don't you? And what's the story behind that?
yeah, so it's nuanced, Marty. So the article is a story of something that happens to me regularly, where somebody reaches out and they may say something like, I'm thinking of selling my business. I need a valuation. And if they're in that window of planning, then I can add a lot of value with the valuation and helping them to understand where the strengths and weaknesses are, what the value drivers are, so that we can work down a path so that when they get to that exit event, they're in a good position in terms of maybe maximizing valuation. But this particular business owner was at that uh-oh moment where he was ready to put that proverbial for sale sign on the front lawn today. So in that situation, I literally had to spend the entire meeting talking him off the ledge that no, what you don't need me is, what you need is one of my colleagues
Yeah.
that can help you in the market. Because while my valuation is great and it's going to help you for planning purposes, and it'll be certainly well documented and well supported, you're at the spot where the for sale sign is going on the lawn. So at this moment in time, what you need is to maximize your valuation by having somebody run a process for you and let the market dictate what that business is going to be. And oh, by the way, the investment banker, as a part of their exercise, is going to perform a valuation so that they can set an expectation for this client. But
Yeah.
it was going to be somebody else inside the firm, but it wasn't going to be me. And that's what I needed him to understand. It really wasn't about getting a valuation. It's about thinking about the bigger process here.
Let's take a break from our case study. Dave, I want you to talk about your podcast, Behind the Numbers. Tell us about that and how we can learn more about that. And I want to talk about your book also briefly, but Behind the Numbers podcast, what's that about and where do we learn more about that?
Yeah, appreciate that. So it's funny. I got invited to be a host for a show after being a guest on a number of shows when the book first came out. And in thinking about what I was going to call the program, had some help from some friends, and we decided Behind the Numbers made the most sense because, as we say, as a teaser for the program, in my world, business performance and business valuation is all measured by the numbers. That's what we do. But the reality is, it's what happens behind the numbers, the conversations, the lessons learned, all of that stuff that isn't necessarily in the balance sheet or the income statement, that really drives what happens in business. So Behind the Numbers is a show, business talk show, where I talk with anyone in the business ecosystem, frankly. It could be business owners, it could be CFOs, other executives, it could be authors, wide variety of topics too. So appreciate that, Marty. You can find Behind the Numbers on every podcast platform that's out there.
Okay, Behind the Numbers. And again, our guest is Dave Bookbinder. And I guess Behind the Numbers also addresses your book, The New ROI, Return on Individuals. What's the thesis or the thought behind the new ROI, or return on individuals?
Yeah, so the thesis there is I never intended to write a book. So I think you know that. But as a valuation professional, valuing intangible assets, one of the intangibles I valued throughout my career is human capital, right? People. And being a single parent for quite some time, I got to work for some folks that were really fantastic leaders, and I understood what it meant to walk through fire for them. I also had the opportunity to work for some folks who didn't quite get it, and they didn't get my best stuff every day. And that kind of speaks to employee engagement. And the book, The New ROI, is essentially my journey to document that people really are an organization's most valuable asset. It's a collaborative effort with about 20 other thought leaders across North America. And fun fact, somebody actually turned it into a play.
Yeah, that was very cool. And it's actually starting to gain momentum in the accounting world, is it not? In terms of how you value people, where it ends up, and all that kind of stuff. You're seeing some success, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the spirit of having never intended to write a book, I certainly never intended to sell a book. The idea was to get a message out there and kind of attract more like-minded individuals who believe what I believe. And that's really what's happening. It's funny. I actually saw something in a Forbes piece not too long ago where somebody mentioned that they believe that the new ROI, return on individuals movement, emphasis that they provided, is going to be a key driver in changing financial reporting for companies. So what I
Wow.
talk about is basically do the right thing around your people, create a great environment for them where they're going to want to do their best work, drive that employee engagement, and you're going to find it's going to drive your business valuation. So,
Mm.
coincidentally, during the pandemic, the SEC actually required some financial reporting requirements around human capital metrics. So,
Wow.
um, my optimistic lens tells me that people are going to wind up on a balance sheet at some point because right
Oh,
now, that people value just gets baked into goodwill.
yeah. So, Scott, he starts talking balance sheets and P&Ls, and I kind of get lost. Like what is he talking about? So I'm going to turn over the next couple of questions to you, and you can go anywhere you want. Although I like to tee up something because most of our experience has been, well, buyers want to see 3 years of financial reports. Is that still true, Scott? Good. And maybe make a comment and ask a question of Dave.
Well, yeah. Before I do, though, I want to, I get a kick out of Dave. He didn't want to be an author, but yet he's getting ready to write a second book. So, or at least, so I think it's kind of stuck with him. And back to that return on the individual thing. As a business owner myself, it kind of dawned on me several years into owning my own that because my focus was always on customer this, customer this, customer this. And I would drive that home. And after about 5 years of business, I said, "You're a knucklehead. You got no customers if you don't have employees who like what they do, enjoy who they're doing it for, and feel something, part of something bigger than themselves." And so, I had a shift in my mindset as well. Several
Yeah.
years into business, but I love the fact that you put that kind of emphasis on that, Dave. So kudos to you for writing the book and for continuing to you know to trumpet that message.
Yeah, and your audience should know that your story is going to be one of the case studies in the book too, Scott. So take a bow.
Wow. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that was awesome to being part of the conversation, and I'm excited to be part of that second book. So
Yeah. So let's get back to the 3 years of reports, P&Ls, balance sheets, etc. Most buyers want to see that. That's what we hear all the time. But Dave Bookbinder, the last couple of years have been interesting. And so I don't know how you reconcile all that and tie that into that's important, but how important is it also for you to project future earnings and future revenue and earnings?
Yeah, so the historical financial statements are important because people are always looking for trends, right? So that's definitely important. As you mentioned, the last 2 years in this COVID environment, it was funny at the beginning of COVID. There was a joke before anybody ever realized how serious this thing was really going to be. The term EBITDA, EBITDA, and the C was COVID. So the
Yeah.
reality was there was going to be a lot of COVID related adjustments, and we're seeing that, frankly. But uh,
hmm
forward projections are important, Marty, for the following reason. Valuation really is a forward looking exercise. So for your audience, if they've ever watched the TV show Shark Tank, and who hasn't, you hear the nature of the questions that they ask, right? What have you done last year, and what do you expect to do next year? And sometimes they ask for the year after that. The idea is, first of all, they want to know that whatever the trend in sales and profitability is sustainable. And I don't want
Mm.
to get too wonky here with the math, but in terms of valuation methodologies, one of the tools that a buyer will use is a discounted cash flow method where they're going to bring back that future forecast to today's dollars at an appropriate rate of risk. So, yeah, that forecast is imperative because just to give you an example, since we're talking about a hypothetical case study and just making stuff up here,
Yes.
uh, if that company did that 15 million in sales last year, but they lost 3 customers and next year they know they're only going to do 10, that's kind of an important nugget of information for a buyer to know.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess it kind of is. Another experience Scott and I have had in contractor succession, and even larger, and this would be a larger HVAC company, $15 million a year, and a profitable one. It is often the boss or the owner who is kind of driving everything. And I listened to an interview you did recently, and the words key man discount came up. Key man discount. So what does that mean to a buyer or to the value of the business? Talk to me about that.
Marty Wolf is stalking me and listening to all my other interviews.
You got to be careful.
I remember
here.
that one. Yeah, I think I remember that one. Yeah, so the idea of a key man discount was, I think, like Scott said, if you get hit by that beer truck going across the street and there's nobody else back at the shop that could take over, well, then that summarizes it right there. Then that business owner was, quote, the key man for the operation, and the business is essentially not sustainable in the absence of that person. So a buyer is going to look at that circumstance, and remember I said that they'll bring back the future to today's dollars at an appropriate level of risk. They're going to dial up that incremental risk for the fact that we only have one person who understands how the business operates.
Yeah.
So, and just so that your audience gets the right context here, there's a relationship here. The greater the risk, the lower the value. So the higher that discount rate, the lower the value. So as you're thinking strategically about your exit planning, anything that you can do that can be de-risking the business from a buyer's perspective is only going to help your valuation.
Yeah. Scott, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so one of the things that comes up oftentimes when I'm talking to not only our clients, but some of my folks that I'm involved in peer groups with and things like that is the difference between an asset and a stock sale. And I remember my CPA years ago when I was involved in one, and I think I didn't do it right. And after the fact, I told him, well, here's what I did. He goes, yeah, that wasn't the smartest thing. So as a seller and as a buyer, how that asset versus stock purchase affects the sale.
Yeah, look, there's always going to be tax implications. And whether it's an asset deal or a stock deal, it matters from a tax perspective. My advice to your audience here and the people that you're talking to is listen to Scott, listen to Marty. You guys are helping them in terms of making the transaction happen and facilitating a good exit. Let the lawyer and the accountant work with you and that team around the table discuss the ramifications and implications of different strategies that pertain to taxes, but they should be listening to you guys.
There you go. Done like a true financial expert. He didn't answer the question, but he gave us advice. I like that. That's the disclaimer. We're not offering any financial advice. So another thing,
I gave you a plug there too. Come on.
You did, and you did well, and you did very, very well. Another thing that we hear or we see, and again, we're now, thank goodness, Dave, we're literally talking to people all over the country. And from our humble beginnings about 3 years ago, and it's been great. And so our questions and our knowledge base is a lot stronger. But even some of the deals are still, they're smaller. But I guess here's the question. The question is, should a seller just kind of sit back and let everything happen, or how involved should they be? Should they be proactive? What should they be thinking about? Asking questions? What's your thoughts on that, Dave?
I would say the seller definitely needs to be engaged and involved, right? So in terms of being proactive, I would say be proactive now before things hit the fan. Be proactive in your planning. Listen to Scott, listen to Marty, and get those plans in place. In terms of during the process, assuming that you've got that intermediary in place, let them guide you and shepherd that whole process for you. They'll let you know where you need to be involved, what you should be doing, what you should be saying. But as the business owner, don't just accept everything. If you've got questions, it's your business, it's your baby. By all means, ask those questions. Yeah,
the value of the team is so important. And if I want to, speaking of shout outs, our relationship with Denise Logan, which started with you, Dave Bookbinder, has blossomed into a wonderful relationship with her and several other people across the country. So Denise's book is a seller's journey, right? Yeah. Seller's journey. And it's been great connecting with her, and that has really been helpful for us. So we're going to start winding down. Scott, good. Any closing comments or questions of Dave? I'm going to give Dave the last words, if you will, but anything you want to ask or say?
Yeah, something we were having a conversation the other day with an individual, and he was talking about clients that just aren't quite ready yet to sell. And I think he used the term, they need to bake some more. So in other words, they're not done cooking, And so, we kind of look at that, and I'm sure, Dave, you run into customers and potential clients as well that just don't have the value built up in their business yet and aren't structured properly for a sale. And so again, back to that, built to sell model is determining what are those key value builders that will help take your business from a multiple of 3 to a multiple of 5, or from 5 to 7, or whatever that might be. And we're finding more and more the value of what we're doing and trying to help those people not only increase their revenue and not only increase their income from that revenue, but structure the business properly in order to sell it. And do you see folks in that world that just aren't quite baked yet?
Yeah, see that quite a bit. And I know you guys, in doing what you do, you're also part-time psychologists, because part of that not fully baked process, to your point, Scott, may be in terms of how they're organized or where they are in terms of financial performance. But there's a lot of psychology in that whole process too, because from my experience and what my friends and colleagues in the space tell me regularly is that even if a company has all the right things in place and could attract a whole host of interest and get a good strategic multiple, to your point, if that business owner isn't ready mentally to sell, it's not going to happen. And the underlying theme seems to be that they're not sure what they're going to do next. I mean, this is something that they've built up. It's their baby. And to let it go, and as I always hear, I'm not ready to play golf for the rest of my life yet. What am I going to do? Might as well just stay put.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, that could end poorly if they wind up in that uh-oh moment where, there's that beer truck or they have that health scare or something like that. So I think what you guys are preaching is exactly what I would tell people. It's spot on. Be prepared, be built to sell, and be strategic in thinking about things, and get that team in place so that when the time comes, you've got all the pieces in place so that the process is the best it can be for you.
So our guest has been Dave Bookbinder. It is spelled just the way it sounds, Bookbinder. David, you can find him on LinkedIn under Dave Bookbinder. His company is BRileyFin.com, BRileyFin.com. His book is The New ROI, Return on Individuals. And as we've already mentioned, he has a great podcast. It's called Behind the Numbers. So, Dave, I'm going to give you the final minute or two or seconds, whatever you want to take. What should we have talked about? Or maybe I didn't ask you the question. Is there anything that you'd like to add to kind of wrap up this interview about our fictitious company?
Well, it's funny because the last words I just said I thought were pretty good closing comments.
They were.
Marty can't leave well enough alone.
Yeah, I know. So you want the encore closing comments? No problem. Happy to oblige. I would say the point of emphasis here is a couple things. Number one, the exit is a process. So take the time while you have the time to get the plans in place and assemble the team so that you are, in Marty's terms, built to sell. And as you're thinking about valuation, remember that it is a forward-looking exercise and it's all about risk. So everything that you're doing to take away a buyer's uncertainties about your financial performance, your leadership performance, your team's performance, your cyber, your everything about the business that you can de-risk is only going to benefit you. Not to mention, it's going to have you running a pretty lean business along the way.
Exactly right. So this has been the Contractor Succession Podcast. My partner, Scott Good, has been with me co-hosting this show. Certainly go to our website to learn more about what we do, contractorsuccession.com. And thank goodness we are kind of national, we are national. And it's been a wonderful growth for us. And we are really feel like we're making a difference for a lot of people. So Dave, Scott, thanks so much.
You guys sure are. You guys are. You're making a difference. You're in a unique niche, and the folks are lucky to be working with you guys.
Thank
you so much. Thanks for listening to the Contractor Succession Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Contractor Succession Podcast. You can learn more about us at our website, contractorsuccession.com. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter.